Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this local town hall event. Um, Title of this presentation is going to be Why GHG? Why greenhouse gas emissions? Why do we care? Why does it matter? What can we do? So we're going to go into what are GHG emissions, and then we're going to dive right into oil and gas production contribution to these emissions, as well as the transmission sector contribution to these emissions. I'm going to dive into how we can evaluate GHG emissions as a community, as a organization. So greenhouse gas emissions, in very simplistic terms, are gases that trap heat in the atmosphere. That is it. And the three primary gases that we are concerned about today is methane, carbon dioxide, and nitrous oxide. Right here, I have a diagram of the global carbon cycle. You may be asking, well, why do you have a global carbon cycle showing up? I'll tell you. Carbon is the backbone of life on Earth. If you didn't know that, now you know. We are made up of carbon. We eat carbon. We release it back into the atmosphere. So anything we do every day and in a daily life, somehow in some form or way, it is released back into the atmosphere. Okay, carbon is the fourth most abundant element in the universe. That's a lot. The carbon cycle maintains the balance in the Earth, so the Earth doesn't overheat or it doesn't cool at rapid pace. Right here, you can see in a diagram, there are pretty much three different sources that can be found from introducing carbon back into the atmosphere. On the more natural side, there is a global gross primary production and respiration of carbon from just trees, vegetation, and the soil back into the atmosphere. When trees die or when they decay, they release that carbon back into the atmosphere. At the same time, they can also absorb it back into the trees themselves. So deforestation, for example, or wildfires, for example, all of those things that destroy or change the land, that is releasing that carbon that was stored back into the atmosphere. Then the ocean, which covers most of the world, releases and takes up carbon as well through algae, through our calcium carbonate marine organisms, shellfishes, coral reefs. Coral reefs are a major part of the carbon cycle. Those also release back into the atmosphere. So that's the natural flux. Then we go to the more anthropogenic flux, or the human flux. Right here, fossil fuel combustion and industrial processes is the primary human activity that releases carbon back into the atmosphere. The burning of fossil fuels, the production of fossil fuels, heating lights in our house, electricity, driving cars on a road, all of those on a daily basis, they are major contributors to the carbon cycle that makes it go back into the atmosphere, which in turn it's trapped because it's a greenhouse gas emission. It stays there, and the Earth just continues to warm. Human emissions of carbon to the atmosphere are on a order of 10 to the 15th grams, which compared to the fast carbon cycle, because there's a slow carbon cycle and there's a fast carbon cycle. Fast carbon cycle has a order of 10 to the 16 to 10 to the 17th gram per year. So we are, as humans, releasing carbon into the atmosphere as though we are part of the fast carbon cycle. Okay? And because of this, the carbon cycle has changed in response to climate change, which humans are a part of. So that is why it is important that we know greenhouse gas emissions and why we should care. Now, oil and gas. Well, on the production side, total indirect greenhouse gas emissions from oil and gas operations, oil and gas production are around 5,200 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, which is 15% of the total energy sector comes from greenhouse gas emissions. And this pie graph right here, which was taken from the EPA, conducted in 2020, shows total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions by the economic sector in 2018. And as you can see, agriculture, or just natural processes, only accounts for 10% of GHG emissions compared to the oil and gas, which the transportation alone is 28%. You add in electricity, 27%, and then you add it in the industry, which is 22%. That's more than half of greenhouse gas emissions being emitted by the economic sector in 2018. So we are using oil and gas, fossil fuels, carbon dioxide, methane as such a high and fast rate compared to the agricultural side, which is 10%. And methane, which is more powerful than carbon dioxide, is the largest component of these greenhouse gas emissions. Another source showed that in 2019 alone, 82 million tons of methane emissions came from oil and gas operations and production, including the end users and transmission. So keep that in mind. Now, how can we evaluate greenhouse gas emissions, you may wonder? How can we as a community, how can we as a nonprofit organization can actually take action, One way is through the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, or GHG Protocol, which is an international accounting tool that provides accounting and reporting standards, sector guidance, calculation tools, and training for businesses and government, both private and public. So that's one way. Another way is greenhouse gas assessment or inventory. Greenhouse gas inventory is actually through the EPA, which can be found on their website. The greenhouse gas inventory is a list of emission sources and its associated emissions quantified using standardized methods. And the reason for developing this inventory can be for many reasons, such as managing greenhouse gas risk and identifying reduction strategies, participating in greenhouse gas markets, or achieving recognition for early voluntary action. So just by simply doing this inventory and reporting on greenhouse gas emissions, you can receive recognition for your organization, for the community. The last reporting tool I want to talk about for evaluating these emissions is the Global Reporting Initiative, or GRI. GRI exists to enable organizations to be transparent and take responsibility for their impacts. They have certain standards called the GRI standards that can be used to prepare sustainability reports. So we have the tools at our fingertips. There are multiple tools and trainings, webinars that can be used to help evaluate greenhouse gas emissions. So it's not something difficult or hard or not possible. It is possible. And this is how. These three are just a few that can be found for private and public sector, for businesses and governments. So, and then now I want to leave off with a simple solution. So I touched on what are greenhouse gas emissions, how the oil and gas sector contributes to it, different ways we can evaluate them. Now, one of the things that you're probably wondering, okay, now we know these numbers, what do we do? What can we possibly do? Well, right here is a diagram pretty much shows we have the emissions, which also is the fossil fuel industry and the deforestation, which leads to the emissions. When you add in renewable energy such as solar panels or wind turbines, and then also when you have something called a carbon offset, which is simply vegetation, planting trees, planting plants, we can come to a more neutral standpoint. Okay, as humans, we're going to be progressing more, and there's no way that we can completely get rid of the oil and gas industry. We can't stop burning fossil fuels completely. That's just not doable. What we can do is incorporate practices that can make the carbon cycle more neutral, so we can slow down climate change and slow down warming or rapid cooling of the environment. So simply planting trees alongside the roads, going to schools and planting trees, those are ways that we can offset the human impact, the human side of it. And I want to leave us off with that today. These are my references. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, and thank you very much.